In this video, we're going to be continuing our discussion about how ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences, affect us later in life. And in the last video, we talked about how they affect our general relationships and finance and success. But today, what we're going to be talking about is how ACEs affect us in our health and our parenting. And in my opinion, those are two of the most important areas in life and two things I want to get right. So if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure and click the little red button and the bell beside it so that you can stay notified when we drop new videos. So let's get started. So how do ACEs affect our health? Well, I think that this is probably the area that has had the most studies completed about it, and scientists have found some pretty riveting statistics, and not all of them are good. One of the most striking to me is that a person with significant ACE score dies an average of 20 years younger than someone who does not have ACEs. And I don't know about you, but that's something I would like to change if we can. And it's one of the many reasons that I'm doing these videos in this series, because my mom actually died at age 57. And that was 13 years ago, almost 14. And so that's what actually got me started on this journey of discovery to figure out why. I mean, the official diagnosis was cancer, but I didn't buy it. I mean, there was nothing wrong with her health other than suddenly getting cancer. And so I just started doing some digging and some research, and I've uncovered some things that I think could change the way that we look at health and wellness. There are several factors that go into the reason that people die an average of 20 years younger, and one of them is, as we discussed in the last video, people who have significant ACE scores struggle with relationships. And so by the time they get to age 45, 50, 55, they typically don't have a large circle or a large network around them anymore, and they tend to be lonelier. So often these deaths are called deaths of despair for that reason. And then another thing that we covered in the last video was finances. A lot of times people with significant ACE scores don't do well financially. They struggle just to get along because they're trying to overcome the past. And so by the time they're 40 or 50 or 60, they don't have the means to get the health care that would help them prevent disease. So those are two of the surrounding factors. But there's also a direct link with ACEs and health. We've all heard about the mind-body connection, but what does that really mean? In the last video, I touched on stress hormones and how even an unborn child can begin to experience the effects of them and learns to deal with stress hormones as normal. The problem is that when stress hormones are chronically released in the body, it begins to wear it down physically, even at the cellular level. And the reason for that is that trauma gets trapped on a cellular level. And so when the trauma isn't dealt with, the body continues to release stress hormones long after the original ACE happens, and then also when new traumas happen, if that's the case. So basically the body's stuck in this fight, flight, freeze state, and it just continues to release the hormones cortisol and adrenaline. So then on top of that, every little trigger or memory or difficult experience also activates the nervous system to release these hormones, and eventually they just wear down the body and cause disease and disorders. Things like autoimmune disease and cancer and diabetes and heart disease, and I mean on and on and on with the physical conditions, but also things like depression and anxiety and panic disorders. And then you also have your behavioral and mental health conditions like BPD or bipolar or ADHD, which is very common among younger children. And then when you also factor in things like addictions and violence in the home, those also contribute to poor health. One of the saddest statistics that I've ever heard in doing the study is that a person with a significant ACE score is 1,220% more likely to commit suicide. And to me, it's like that should be a wake-up call that we need to do something about adverse childhood experiences. And there are other numbers like that, like 390% higher chance of heart disease and 240% higher chance of having hepatitis. And honestly, the higher a person's ACE score, the greater those numbers are. So the chances just go up with every ACE that a person has, which makes sense, but it's sad, and to me it's very compelling, like I said, that we need to do something about this. 91% of Harvard students who admitted to having a difficult relationship with their parents had very serious health issues just 30 years later, compared to 45% of those same Harvard students who thought that they had a healthy relationship with their parents. Interesting to note here that 50% of people who believe that they have a healthy relationship with their parents or normal upbringing come to find out that it wasn't as rosy as they first thought upon closer inspection. And the reason for that is because most of the time the damage is done before the person is old enough to consciously retain the memory. And so the unconscious stores it on a visceral or cellular level. And I think I just read a statistic last week where the most likely time in life that a person is abused is from age 0 to 3. How sad is that? So basically, just to sum up what we've discussed, unresolved grief and trauma, trapped in the body, stored in the body, turn into physical conditions like heart disease, high blood pressure, cancer, arthritis, migraine headaches, autoimmune disorders, and many more, which then leads to premature deaths of despair because of hopelessness or loneliness or lack of financial means or repressed anger or you name it. Even if nothing else I say in this 2-part series motivates you to go after that recovery, this should. Your health and your longevity are so important, and they're in reach. Just because ACEs started life off wrong doesn't mean that you're stuck with that. So things change the minute you reach that moment of recovery. Your body, your cells release the trauma. The journey looks different for everyone. There's not like this perfect cookie cutter approach, but I promise you it's worth digging deep and fighting for. All right, so the last category that we're going to cover in this 2-part series is how do ACEs affect parenting? And if I could just land here for several episodes, there still wouldn't be enough time to cover all of the things that go into this. And I want to start off by reading a couple quotes by Gabor Mate, because to me he's one of the leading experts when it comes to this topic of ACEs related to childhood trauma and attachment and all of that. So the first one is, the way a child responds to ACEs is most affected by the extent to which the caregivers buffer the child from the stressors, which builds the child's ability to cope with it, enabling him or her to develop resilience. And the other one is, and this just basically sums it up, the relationship between mother and child is not just crucial for emotional development and mental health, but also for cognition and sense of competence. It literally makes or breaks the future success of the child. Although it's not included on the official ACE test, it is my opinion, after doing years of research and talking to many people with significant ACE scores, that the most significant and damaging ACE is attachment trauma. And again, it's not on the official ACE test, probably because it just falls silently under the category of emotional neglect, which is on the official ACE test. But the importance of attachment trauma needs to be underscored and highlighted, in my opinion, because it sets the stage for the rest of a person's life. Even if it's the only ACE they ever have, it's damaging enough to have lifelong consequences. I understand that parenting is one of the most sensitive topics out there, mostly because none of us wants to be the bad guy, because we deeply love our children and take care of them to the best of our abilities. So when we're talking about parenting, there are no fingers of blame being pointed. I just wanted you to know that. That doesn't help anyone. We do the best we can with what we're given. Typically, and there are exceptions to this, the way a person parents is the way he or she was parented. And before we can blame our parents, we have to ask how were they parented, and so on. What I found in my own family, and I know that there are exceptions to this, but it seems to get a little better every generation. So let's take a closer look at how parenting affects a child. It's been scientifically proven that toxic stress in the first 6 to 7 years of a person's life affects the development of the person's nervous system, including the brain. If the toxic stress happens in vitro, it can even change the expression of the genes. It also affects the brain circuitry including the circuits that are responsible for memory and problem solving and impulse control and following directions, etc. If those traits sound familiar, they should. ADHD is the #1 psychiatric condition diagnosed in this country. It's not random. It's directly linked to parenting, in vitro and beyond. And again, this isn't to point fingers of blame. It's to help explain what's really going on so we can reverse and prevent this and other conditions in the future. I realize a lot of work has been done to link diet to ADHD, and while I don't think simple sugars help, I don't think it's the cause. And I know this topic is up for debate. It's just after doing years and years of research, this is what I have found to be the truth. But I want to talk a little bit more about the foundation of all human struggle, and that is attachment trauma. Babies are born with an instinctual ability to form special bonds with things or people. They start out by being responsive to sensory or nonverbal communications by their primary caregiver, especially the mother. They innately trust their ability to bond with these primary caregivers. If a baby's needs for cleaning and feeding and sleep and mirroring and stimulation and touch and security and comforting and nurturing are met, then the baby's able to form those healthy bonds with their caregivers. If the baby's needs aren't met well enough, they form what's called an ambivalent bond, which promotes things like dislike, distrust, confusion, shame ties, and guilt. If this continues the first 6 years of life, but especially the first 3, they start to numb out, detach, and psychologically disconnect from their primary caregivers. This is the age that you start to see learning and social and emotional problems and even physical disabilities and illness. It's also at this age that they increasingly start to meet their own needs or determine that their needs aren't important, which is the root of self-neglect. Several personality disorders are rooted in these early developmental issues, including borderline personality disorder, bipolar, narcissistic personality disorder, and self-love deficit disorder, amongst many others, but those are just the most common. 0 to 7 years are the programming years, and during this stage, our children spend most of their time in alpha and theta brainwave cycles. And this is the same state a person is in when they're doing deep meditation or hypnosis. So imagine your child in this constant state of hypnosis, being programmed by his or her environment, wide open to suggestion, like this hyper learning state. And one of the reasons that parents play such a crucial role in these developmental years is that children pick up on all the moods and emotions that the parents exhibit and treat them as their own. ACEs cause adaptations in children that are helpful in the short term. They help them survive the environment that they're in, but they are the cause of long-term pathology. One example of a common adaptation is people-pleasing. We're all pretty familiar with that phrase. Basically, it's choosing connection with others over being authentically yourself. So it's denial of self. It's authenticity versus attachment. You're having to choose between connection with others or being true to yourself. As a society, it's become easier for us to blame the problems these children have on genetic flaws instead of really looking at the role that parenting plays in a human's development. And I think that's because we already do the best we can and we already struggle with a multitude of self-blame and self-criticism. So there needs to be some reassurance here, and we need to be gentle on ourselves and realize that it's not our fault per se. The way we parent is the way we were parented, hence the term transgenerational trauma. But the problem with genetic theory is that it leaves us at a dead end with no solution other than medication. What we really need to do to promote healthy society is to educate parents on healthy attachment, what that even means, and when it's most effective. So as we talk about ACEs in future videos, I really want to focus on not only the negative aspects of parenting, but the positive, success-oriented ones as well. Because I know a lot of us are raising children in the attachment and developmental stages, and prevention is a whole lot easier than recovery. But what about those of us, myself again included in this, who have older children or adult children, or those of us who don't have children, who recognize that maybe we weren't parented the best and maybe we have some toxicity that we need to deal with? This is where recovery comes in. When it comes to ACEs, whether past, present, or future, education is power. The more we know, the easier it is for us to start living a better life and to help our families do so as well. For those of you who have stuck with me through this two-part series, thank you for taking the time and caring enough to educate yourself on something that I believe is one of the most important issues facing our society. It's a problem that affects each and every one of us in one way or the other, even if it's just simply to understand a difficult coworker better. It's worth it. In the next video, we'll be talking about recovery and treatment options for those of us who have faced adverse childhood experiences. And if you missed the ACE test in the last video, I'm going to put the link again in the description, and that way you can go in. The test is free, takes about a minute, and that way you can get your ACE score, because that's step one. Also, I'd love to connect with you on social media. I have a page, Leah Theobald, on Facebook. Definitely go in and send me a DM or put a comment. I also give free giveaways every week, so sign up for that on my page. And if you liked the video, give me a like so that it helps others find it. Thank you so much. See you next time.